a fist to the face of Gnostic doctrine. We are not a mistaken reality into which bits and crippled shards of lesser deity fall like sparks out of a fire into the grass.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Louh.
And I'm Dr. Roxanne. We're happy to be with you this evening.
We're so happy that you're taking the time to join us on this Tuesday, right before Thanksgiving. We want to wish all of you just a happy Thanksgiving from all of us here at the Louhs family, and just to thank you for taking the time to be part of our ministry and to take the time to listen to tonight's show. You know, when we started this show several years ago, our hope and our intent was to provide a show that really gave you some practical steps that you can apply every single day of your life to guide you in your walk of faith. And so we hope that we're doing that for you. Again, we thank you for your thoughts and your prayers. And if this show is beneficial to you, please do us a favor. Share it with your friends and family. Our show airs every single Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Ancient Faith Radio. Before we dive into tonight's really cool topic and our amazing speaker, by the way, I do want to encourage all of you to stay in touch with us all throughout the week through our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all under the headings of The Louhs, and that last name is spelled Louhs. And we also have all of our sermons are archived on our YouTube channel. And again, that also is under The Louhs as well. And if you find those sermons beneficial, friends, do us a favor, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then share those messages with your friends and family. We just all want to make a difference in this world, to be a blessing in this world, so help us to do just that. And if you're like us, you'd like to receive just maybe some daily words of encouragement or inspiration, this past year, Roxanne and I started sending out these messages every single day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time that are really just practical Christianity. They're just daily practical Christian pieces of or nuggets of information that we use to kind of help you guide you in your walk of faith. So if you would love to receive these messages, it's very simple. All you have to do is go to our website at thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address. And tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive one of our daily inspirational messages. And as always, we invite you to join the conversation. You can call us during the show at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question by going to in your email browser to ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started, friends. You've often heard the saying, you are what you eat. Well, food is part of our everyday life. We need it. It's our sustenance. It has the power to give us the nourishment that we need to journey throughout our day. But with something so essential to our lives, let me ask you, do we truly take the time to know what we're putting in our bodies? Like if our bodies fuel is to do great things on this earth that God has given us, and this fuel that He gives us to help us to fulfill God's purpose on this earth is food, or at least one of those ways is, shouldn't we be looking more at what we're ingesting? The reality is, friends, is that for many of us, food becomes really a matter of convenience because we're living in a fast paced lifestyles where all we're doing is oftentimes simply preparing the meal, not having the time to really think about what we're eating. Instead of us being intentional, many of us are simply just looking as a way of just simply satisfying a need. Earlier this week, we had the opportunity to interview an extraordinary author and a new friend to our show. It's New York Times best-selling author, Dr. Michael Greger. Now, let me tell you a little bit about him, and some of you may already know who he is, but Dr. Greger is a founding member and fellow of the American Colleges of Lifestyle Medicine. He's a Cornell graduate, physician, and internationally recognized speaker on nutrition. His latest book, a New York Times hit, actually just within a few days of its coming out, the book entitled How Not to Die, is one of the best guides ever written for how to commit to a lifestyle that will help us live longer and healthier lives. His science-based nonprofit nutritionfacts.org offers a free online portal hosting that has more than 2,000 videos and articles on a myriad of health topics. Friends, he has presented at the Conference on World Affairs and the World Bank and testified before our Congress. The book, How Not to Die, as I mentioned earlier, became an instant New York Times bestseller with more than 1 million books already sold. And what I love so much about Dr. Greger is all proceeds from Dr. Greger's books, as well as his speaking honoraria, are all donated directly to charity.
Well, welcome, Dr. Greger, to our show. We're so excited to have him on. In recent years, Dr. Greger, there's been increasing interest in a whole food, plant-based diet as a means of promoting health, with plant-based meaning no animal products and whole foods really meaning minimally processed plants where nothing is really added and chemicals aren't added especially. And as Orthodox Christians, we're currently in an Advent fasting season. And so we use fasting from meat and dairy products as a tool to help us really connect, more deeply in our faith. And so we know there's a tremendous amount of benefits spiritually when it comes to plant-based eating, but maybe you could share with our listeners a bit about whether research also supports how plant-based diets can also help us mentally and emotionally all throughout the year as well.
Oh, absolutely. The good news is that we have tremendous power over our health, destiny, and longevity. The vast majority of premature death and disability is preventable with a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors. And this extends beyond just physical health into mental health and well-being as well. There was a study done by an Adventist group at the University of Arizona where they randomized people to remove meat and dairy from people's diet. And in a matter of 2 weeks, saw significant improvement in mood among those randomized to the interventional group versus the control group who was told to just continue to eat how they were eating before. And so this is a rare randomized control trial proving within literally a few weeks that you can improve one's sense of well-being just by improving the quality of one's diet.
That's absolutely incredible to hear. So really, we can actually improve our mood through our diet alone.
And there's also been research done on generalized anxiety disorder. The University of Arizona study was done on people without a major mental illness. So these were people just like you and me walking around, and they just felt even better after 2 weeks. It has not yet been tested on people with major depression to see if we could actually treat that very serious mental illness. But there have been studies done on what's called generalized anxiety disorder, which is a growing mental health problem here in the United States. And we do see a significant improvement in anxiety. And we're not exactly sure what is going on. It may be something called arachidonic acid, which is a long-chain pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid found predominantly in chicken and eggs in the American food supply. And so the researchers suggest this may be causing neuroinflammation, maybe inflaming people's brain, and that's why within as short as 2 weeks of removing some of these, reducing one's arachidonic acid intake, you could get this boosted mood as you were washing away some of that inflammation. Still not exactly sure, but that's one of the many theories as to why we see an improvement in both depression and anxiety by making these healthy dietary changes.
Yeah, that's so powerful because I think so often, we get caught up in um, thinking that when we're on diets that it's simply just benefiting us physically, or when we're abstaining or fasting that it's just impacting us just physically. But what we're seeing and what the research is showing overwhelmingly is how effective proper plant-based eating is in impacting not only our physical health, I would argue our spiritual health, and as well as our mental health. But kind of building on what you were saying, Dr. Greger, there's so much confusion out there today about what really is a truly healthy diet. What is the healthiest ways to eat for our bodies, minds, and souls all year long? What would you recommend for our listeners?
The best available balance of evidence suggests the healthiest diet is one that minimizes the intake of meat, eggs, dairy, and processed junk, and maximizes the intake of fruits and vegetables and legumes, which are beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, whole grains, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, herbs, and spices, basically real food that grows out of the ground. These are our healthiest choices. Now, it doesn't matter what we eat on, holidays, special occasions, birthdays, that kind of thing. It's the day-to-day stuff that really adds up. And on a day-to-day basis, we really should try to center our diets around these whole healthy plant foods.
Well, can you walk us through, if you don't mind, what does your day look like? Your food?
I know. I've always wondered the same thing.
I think our listeners would love to hear what does Dr. Greger
How does Dr. Greger eat?
Well, the first half of my book, How Not to Die, is just 15 chapters on each of the 15 leading causes of death, talking about the role diet may play in preventing, arresting, reversing each of our top 15 killers. But I wanted this to be more than just kind of a reference book. So that became the second half of the book, where kind of a practical day-to-day, kind of grocery store, kind of, practical guide, and where I center my recommendations around a daily dozen checklist of all the healthiest of healthy foods I encourage people to try to fit into their diet. And so, for example, not just eating plant foods in general, but specifically eating berries, the healthiest fruits, greens, the healthiest type of vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, tablespoon of ground flaxseed, a quarter teaspoon of turmeric, the best beverages, best sweeteners, how much exercise to get. Again, just trying to inspire people to include really some of the healthiest of healthy foods into their daily routine. And so that's something that grew out of my trying to improve the diet of my family. Is I'd come across this great research on flax seeds or something and be like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about flax seeds. And so I made a little checklist on a whiteboard on the fridge, and so I could look at it and be like, oh, I haven't had any beans today. Oh, I'm going to have some hummus. Or I'm going to have some whatever. And so that's where it really grew out of, and it's available on a free app on iPhone, Android, called Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen. And so you can just track your progress, see how you do along the day, and just kind of make it fun.
So could you go over to the 12 foods you recommend that people try to incorporate every single day, which you coined the Daily Dozen? What are those foods?
Yeah, so I mentioned a few of them. So it was berries, and then dark green leafy vegetables. And I also encourage people, and then the flax seeds, quarter teaspoon of turmeric. Also encourage people to eat 3 servings of whole grains every day. That's also a recommendation of the American Institute for Cancer Research in terms of cancer prevention. And also nuts and seeds, an ounce a day of nuts and seeds. Encourage people to eat 2 other servings of other vegetables, specifically cruciferous vegetables. So these are the broccoli family vegetables like kale, collards, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. They have specific nutrients, just like the flax seeds, that aren't found anywhere else in the plant kingdom in abundance. And so that's why there are some nutrients like vitamin C found widely throughout the plant kingdom. So, you don't have to worry about which plants to eat to get your vitamin C. But there are other nutrients like the anti-cancer lignans in the flax seeds or sulforaphane in these cruciferous vegetables, where if you don't eat those specific foods, you're really missing out on all the benefits.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's just incredible to me, by God's design, what comes from the earth and the way our bodies were
Hmm.
meant to live sort of go hand in hand. And so, maybe in short, you could tell our listeners a little bit about your book, How Not to Die. How did that book come into existence,
Right.
and what are some things you maybe reveal in that book that might surprise our listeners?
Yeah, well, that book really came out of my experience with my grandmother as a kid. I was just a young child when my doctor sent my grandma home in a wheelchair to die. She was diagnosed with
Mm.
end-stage heart disease. She already had so many bypass operations, you basically run out of plumbing at some point. Confined to a wheelchair, crushing chest pain. There was nothing more they could do. Her life was over at age 65. But then she heard about this guy, Nathan Pritikin, one of our early lifestyle medicine pioneers. And what happened next is actually detailed in Pritikin's biography. He talks about Frances Greger, my grandmother. They wheeled her in
Wow.
and she walked out. Though she was given her medical death sentence at age 65, thanks to a healthy diet, was able to enjoy another 31 years on this planet to
Wow.
age 96 to continue to enjoy 6 grandkids, including me. And so that's why I went into medicine, become a doctor, why I practice lifestyle medicine, why I started the website nutritionfacts.org, why I wrote the book, How Not to Die, why all the proceeds from all my books are all donated directly to charity. I just want to do for everyone's family what
Hmm.
Pritikin did for my family.
So, specifically, how does eating a plant based diet contribute to our physical well being? I mean, you mentioned that they wheeled her in and she walked out. Based on Western medicine, that was all they could do. How did changing her diet contribute, and how can it contribute to our physical well being overall?
Well, so in her case, it was heart disease. At the time, back in the 70s, we didn't even know heart disease was reversible. Pritikin was doing this by the thousands, but it wasn't until Dr. Dean Ornish came along and published a randomized controlled trial using something called angiography, where you actually visualize what's happening inside people's arteries using these special dyes and X-rays, and you can prove for the first time you can open up arteries without drugs, without surgery, just a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors. And so that was really the first time that it had been proven, and it was published in one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Yet, surprisingly, nothing happened. But basically, we have the cure to the number one killer of men and women in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of men and women
Mm.
continue to die needlessly from this preventable, arrestable, reversible condition, something we've known about literally for decades. Ornish was publishing back in 1990. Yet, we have the power to affect these, but unfortunately, the system is kind of designed to undervalue these kind of lifestyle changes, as opposed to these more high tech, profitable approaches.
Why do you think that is, Dr. Greger? I mean, why, with all this information that's available to us, why oftentimes is the narrative not that? That oftentimes what we're hearing out there is, I remember growing up and they would tell us, I do a lot of, running and working out, that, we should eat eggs every day, eat a lot of eggs and
A lot of protein,
a lot of
right?
protein, have a
Right.
steak, why is that information not easily or why has the narrative really been so much about what the latter as opposed to
Yeah, so contradictory. There's a lot of contradictory research out
Right.
right?
there.
Well, doctors have a severe nutrition deficiency in education. Most doctors just never taught about the impact healthy nutrition can have in the course of illness, and so they graduate without this powerful tool in their medical toolbox. There's also institutional barriers such as time constraints, lack of reimbursement. In general,
Mm-hmm.
doctors simply aren't paid for counseling people on how to take
Mm-hmm.
better care of themselves. Of course, drug companies also play a role in influencing medical education and practice. You can
Mm-hmm.
ask your doctor when the last time they were taken out to dinner by Big Broccoli. It's probably been a while. But basically, it's like we're in the same situation as smoking in the 50s, right? We already had decades of science, starting back in the 30s, linking
Right.
smoking with lung cancer. But it was ignored. Why? Because smoking was normal. Most doctors smoked. The average per capita cigarette consumption was 4,000 cigarettes a year, meaning the average American walking around smoked half pack a day, on average. Right? The American Medical Association Was it reassuring everyone that smoking in moderation was fine, right? So there was a disconnect between the science and public policy. And it took decades and more than 7,000 studies before the first Surgeon General's report against smoking came out in 1964. They cited 7,000 studies. You think maybe after 6,000 studies, they could have given people a little heads up or something?
Right.
Right? No, but they were, back in the 50s, on one hand, you had all of society, the government, the medical profession itself telling you to smoke. And on the other hand, all you had was the science. If you're even aware of those studies, which most people weren't, right? Until the system changes now, today, we need to take personal responsibility for our own health, for our family's health. We can't wait until society catches up to the science again, because it's a matter of life and death.
I mean, absolutely incredible. We've heard a lot of, folks when we first started talking about plant-based diets, and this sort of came into our lives on our own journey through watching our father's illnesses. As we talked about plant-based diets, we have a lot of people, saying, well, can't get enough protein and on diets like that. And what about the meat-based vitamins and minerals like B12 and iron? What could you share with our listeners about really how much protein the average American actually needs, and how we can sort of get these quote unquote meat-based vitamins and minerals through actually eating what comes, from the earth?
Yeah, anyone who doesn't know how to get protein on a plant-based diet doesn't know beans. Indeed, legumes, right? Beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils, these are the plant protein superstars. The recommended daily allowance of protein is 0.8 grams per healthy kilogram body weight. It comes out to be about 50 grams a day for the average person. I mean, one good PB&J takes you half the way there. Most Americans, including those eating strictly plant-based, vegetarians, vegans, getting about 70% more protein than they need every day. But the reason plant sources are primarily preferable is the baggage that comes along with the animal protein. Food is kind of a packaged deal. So as much as Burger King says, you can have it your way, you can't be like, yeah, I like the burger, but hold the saturated fat, hold the cholesterol, the hormones, blah, blah, blah. No, whereas what's the baggage that comes along with plant protein? Many of the nutrients most Americans are lacking, right? 97% of Americans don't even reach the recommended minimum daily intake of fiber. 98% of Americans suffer from potassium deficient diets. And most of these dietary deficiencies are due to an inadequate intake of whole plant foods. And so almost everyone, it's like 97% of Americans get enough protein. The only people that don't are people eating severely calorically restricted diets. They're eating so little that they're not getting enough nutrients kind of across the board. But it's really the question is, wait a second, where do you get your fiber from? Right? Where do you get your potassium from? Oh, you get it from dark green leafies and sweet potatoes and these super healthy foods that most people just aren't eating enough of. They need to go back to Genesis and see what they're eating in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Absolutely incredible. I mean, tell us about fruit, Dr. Greger. With so much information in what I would call trendy pop nutrition today about eating a low carb diet, the avoidance of all things sugar. Tell our listeners a little bit about your take on fruits, legumes, other plant-based sources of sugar and carbohydrate in light of what we're now seeing in this sort of low carb diet industry.
Well, the Global Burden of Disease Study, which is the largest study on human risk factors for disease in history, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, found that the number one cause of death, number one risk factor for death on planet Earth for human beings was indeed the human diet, what we were eating. The number one worst thing about the human diet was too much sodium intake. That's largely because the processed food industry likes dumping salt into everything. But number two was inadequate fruit intake. Like the second worst thing was not, soda or hot dogs, it was not getting enough fruit. Like we could save more lives if people just ate more fruit. And then next on the list was inadequate whole grain intake, inadequate vegetable intake, inadequate nuts and seed intake. So out of the five, one was something we're getting too much of, which was sodium. But the other 4 out of 5 were whole plant fruits we weren't getting enough of. So we should really go out of our way. So fruit's the perfect dessert, and particularly berries. And that's because of the bright, colorful pigments in berries pass through the blood-brain barrier. and may explain why, for example, Harvard researchers found that women consuming at least one serving of blueberries, 2 servings of strawberries a week, slower rates of cognitive decline by about 2.5 years compared to those who didn't eat berries. So these results suggest a simple act of eating a handful of berries every day. One, easy, delicious dietary tweak may slow your brain's aging by more than 2 years. American Cancer Society study found of nearly 100,000 men and women found those who ate the most berries appeared significantly less likely to die of cardiovascular disease. So it's like, wait a second, tastes great and you get to live longer. That's what plant-based eating is all about.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Greger, as you're speaking, I'm sure you've been posed this question before, but for our listeners tonight, how do you respond to when people talk about eating healthy is expensive, or at least the perception is that it's very, very expensive, and people that are on a limited income or have very limited resources, how do they navigate this? Because for some people that are listening, they may not be able to financially afford some of the ways that we're kind of suggesting, and is that true or not? I mean, that may just be simply a myth that people have kind of bought into. But what is your response to that?
My response is go to the store and check out the price of dried beans.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the healthiest foods out there, like red cabbage, apples, dried beans, are some of the cheapest foods in the entire supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly on a per serving or by weight basis. And in fact, there are studies showing that the average family can save hundreds of dollars switching to eating healthier diets. And so it's ironic that some of the most expensive foods, per serving, per pound, something like breakfast cereal or something, is actually some of the worst foods out there. And some of the healthiest foods, like sweet potatoes or something, are really among the cheapest. And so, yes, it is indeed a myth. Now, if you want to go out and buy, fancy imported exotic foods, well, sure, you can spend as much as you want on anything. But but if you're sticking to, the produce aisle, you're sticking to the basics, the healthiest foods, then you're really actually saving money in the long run.
How about for diabetics, with the legumes and fruits and things that sort of do end up digesting down to sugars? What does plant-based dieting still, work for diabetics?
Not only does it work for diabetes, you can actually reverse type 2 diabetes with a plant-based diet. Meaning you have normal blood sugars, eating a normal diet, all the carbs you want. And in fact, they've done studies randomizing diabetics to eat fruit or to restrict fruit, and those who eat more fruit actually have better both short and long-term blood sugar control. But no, we're not talking about we're talking about fruit. We're talking about whole foods. We're not talking about so-called free sugars or added sugars. These are sugars that are not encapsulated in the plant walls, which is made out of fiber, which slows the rate of digestion. When you free those sugars in something like fruit juice or soda, or added sugars in a pastry or something, that's where you get these exaggerated blood sugar spikes absorbed very early in the small intestine, and you can really put stress on your body in terms of becoming what's called insulin resistant. And that's the kind of primary mechanism for both prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. But we can reverse that insulin resistance by putting people on a whole food plant-based diet. In fact, so powerfully that you need to do this under supervision of your physician. If you're on insulin, if you're on these blood sugar drugs, you can drop your sugars too low by all of a sudden starting to eat healthy. And so your doctor has to rapidly pull you off these drugs. Same things with high blood pressure. You can get better so quickly, you can find yourself rapidly over-medicated. So you have to have your doctor wean you off these drugs as you treat the cause and come back to health.
Dr. Greger, Roxanne and I serve at the Greek Orthodox Church here in Jacksonville, Florida. And one thing that's clear about our theology, especially that's what's found in monasteries, is very much a plant-based diet. There's only really 99% of the time, only on special days, perhaps once a year, they may eat fish, but there's never any meat consumption. But, if you were to nominate 3 superfoods for our listeners, what would they be and why?
Yeah, if I could just add three foods to people's diets, one would be berries, the healthiest fruits. Two would be dark green leafy vegetables, the healthiest vegetables, and then some form of legume, whether you're eating lentil soup or bean dip or beef burritos, anything. We won't. I mean, the healthiest populations around the world, these so-called blue zones, each center their diets around plants in general, and specifically as their primary protein source, one of these legumes. And so those would be the three. And if there were just three foods I would remove from people's diet, first, it would be anything with trans fats, these hydrogenated oils, which is not a problem in the United States anymore, but still used around some of the rest of the world. Number two would be processed meat. So that's ham, hot dogs, sausage, lunch meat. These are known human carcinogens. We know they cause colorectal cancer. We really need to ideally eliminate them from the diet. And number three, liquid candy, soda. We really need to start drinking healthier beverages. I encourage people, water is really the best beverage, but also a number of herbal teas like hibiscus tea and green tea are beneficial for one's health.
Kind of building on that, Dr. Greger, if you had a magic wand and you were able to make one significant change to the health industry that we have in the States or really around the world, what would that be?
Well, in terms of policy, it would really be removing industry subsidies for some of the unhealthiest foods. So we, as taxpayers, actually give money to the sugar industry. Why do we do that when we're just end up increasing healthcare costs? We make feedstuffs like corn and soy artificially low to help the meat and dairy industries. And so that's why we can get dollar menu burgers. Is because we, the taxpayers, are artificially lowering. And so some have gone the other direction, said we should be subsidizing healthier foods. There should be like free fruits and vegetables. But you don't even have to go that far. I mean, just stopping, cutting subsidies across the board, because the current subsidies are going to these very powerful corporations, which have become that way because they have been having these price supports all along. I think that would go a long way. Beyond that, I think a very powerful tool has been offering healthy foods as the default option. So, for example, very recently, in the last 2 months, all public hospitals in New York City, there are 11, made their the default option for all their meals strictly plant-based. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. Healthy food in a hospital? What a concept, right? Now, look, you can still go out of your way and order meat if you want. But the default option is healthy. And so it turns out about 60% of people stick to the default option. And so that's over 1 million meals every year that people are eating healthier just because that was just kind of, what was on offer. And I think so that's a very kind of powerful way, whether we're talking about getting people to accept, organ donation, whatever, just making the default option. And so, look, people still have a choice. We're not taking any choices away, but we're just making, the easiest choice, the one right in front of them, the healthiest choice.
And finally, Dr. Greger, speak to our listeners a little bit about the blue zones. You mentioned those earlier, the cultures with the greatest longevity. What can we learn from having had studied those cultures and their way of living? I believe there's one of them is in Greece. Isn't that correct?
Yes, indeed. And in fact, this very morning, I was speaking with Dan Buettner, who was kind of the lead investigator into the Blue Zones Project. I'm very honored to do so. Yeah, so there's these demographers. They have like a heat zone map of the world in terms of which societies have the greatest longevity, the greatest proportion of centenarians, people that live over 100. And so the heat map was red is the worst, but the blue, the very few, there's these 5 spots around the world that turned up blue that had the best longevity, and so that's how they got the term blue zones. There's one in Costa Rica, the one in Sardinia, Greece, one in Okinawa, Japan, but what's sad about these is that there's only one left that survives to this day. So In the earlier part of the last century, Okinawa Japanese had one of the longest life expectancies, but then now they're actually one of the most obese. They have more KFCs now with the westernization. And so they actually have some of the worst public health statistics in Japan. They used to have the healthiest, but there's one that exists to this day, and that is the Seventh-day Adventist population in Loma Linda, California. It's actually also the only blue zone that isn't isolated, that isn't an island, or in other ways, kind of a peninsula that's hard to get to. So that's why you couldn't get a lot of sugar and you couldn't get a lot of garbage in their direction. But here we are, right in thriving Southern California. You had these Adventists who, through religious teachings, that kind of the body is the temple, have this predilection to eat more plant-based. And in doing so, became the longest living formally studied population in the world, living even longer than the Okinawa Japanese at their heyday, and continuing to this very day in the modern world, being able to kind of resist the temptations that we are bombarded with from the fast food and junk industries, and able to maintain this remarkable health to this day. And they can act as, we can kind of look to them for inspiration that it is indeed possible to remain healthy and thriving in the modern world.
Dr. Greger, we thank you so much for just sharing your input, your advice, your encouragement, and your knowledge and your passion. I mean, Roxanne and I have just so much enjoyed having you on our show. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We know how busy you are. And, God willing, we'd love to have you back on in the future. But thank you so much for being with us this evening.
I would be honored to be back. Keep up the good work. God bless.
Thank you so much. And we'll be right back here on Live with the Louhs.
Live with the Louhs with Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne will be back in a moment. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. They would love to hear from you.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Live with the Louhs and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne. Do you have a question for the Louhs? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here once again is Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, welcome back to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're all joining us this evening. And what a powerful first half of our show, Roxanne, with interviewing Dr. Michael Greger, the author of the New York Times best-selling book, How Not to Die. This was the first time he's ever been on Ancient Faith, and to have him on our show was really remarkable. And I think as we're ushering in this season of Advent, this season of fasting, I know that we thought that it would be great to have someone on our show that really spoke about how powerful what we're eating, and not only just for dietary purposes, as we spoke about at the top of the show, but also how food could help us to continue to do the work that God yearns for us to do, that God has a purpose and a plan for our life. And when we're fatigued, we're tired, when we're not eating the right food or getting enough sleep, how that impacts us. I know one of my favorite Bible verses that speaks about this is taken from the book of Corinthians. Actually, it's 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and 7. A great, great book to read, everyone. And it says this: since we have all these promises, and it's referring to the promises that God gives us, it says, dear friends, then let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body and the spirit, so that we can remain in perfect holiness out of reverence for God. And so I'd love to like kind of begin the second half of the show, Roxanne, by asking you what spoke out to you the most from hearing from Dr. Greger.
Well, I mean, I think it's, the body is an incredible design. And I think I always, feel like I go back to that when you hear how we were meant to operate, how we were best meant to operate by what God put on the earth. That directly comes from the earth, unadulterated, untainted. If we human beings sort of left things alone, and we're not led by as many big industries and the temptations of oftentimes monetary gain, we find that just the cleanest, form of fuel for our spirits, for our emotional health and well-being, were just the simple things that he sort of created. And so I just think it's very interesting that some of the temptations that I think have come on society collectively um, have really hurt our bodies. At the end of the day, if you look at the body as the vehicle of the soul, we need it in great form. If our body is to carry our soul to go out and do these great things in the world, as you said, we cannot do it when we are exhausted. We certainly can't do it when we are battling disease. What do things like cancer, heart disease, what do they really, they shorten our life. Slow us down. We get on all sorts of medications. We're in doctor's appointments all the time. And so really the body, the soul, feels almost like imprisoned in this body that by design is being hurt by sort of collective temptation in the world, for big industry and things that are really hurting us. And I think as a whole, when I listen to that, I think of the deception that sometimes, we eat what's in front of us, but we sometimes forget to be discerning as to why we're eating what we're eating and what's really going to be the best by God's design for my soul to thrive.
Right. And I think it's where St. Paul was really reminding us as listeners. He was saying, listen, let us be sure to purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body. If you're just joining us this evening, we've been speaking with Dr. Michael Greger, the author of the New York Times bestselling book, How Not to Die. He was on our first half of our show. And so we've dedicated the show as we're ushering in this Advent season, this season of fasting that begins on November 15th and concludes on December 25th, is that we are also taking the opportunity to allow you as our listeners to call us if you're interested in have some questions about not only our interview, but also the topic of fasting by calling us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or you can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. And Roxanne, I think one of the things that, to kind of make this transition even more whole is that, Dr. Greger spent so much time really talking about the importance of us kind of, keeping our bodies whole and healthy. And we're transitioning to that to emphasize this to our listeners about the importance of, because God has a purpose for us. He has a plan for us. He desires for us to do these great things, not only outside, but also even in our own walk of faith. And that's really what I'd like to spend a few minutes with Roxanne, is actually talking about not only the toxins that we ingest every day. We know that there are studies show that we are ingesting over 700,000 toxins every single day, friends, and that's 700,000 toxins. But what about the toxins that we are ingesting with what we see in the world? How our spirit man is every day being impacted with unhealthy thinking, with allowing our feelings to kind of lead us, sometimes with a very status quo idea of what faith should look like, when we're all kind of living, each day as if it's our last, and just kind of buying into this lie that this is the only life that matters. What about those toxins that are impacting us? And so you may be asking yourself, well, what specifically are the toxins that you're dealing with? And really, I'd like for you to kind of spend some time really honing in. If there was an area that I need to be fasting from during this Advent season, what would it be? And maybe your response would be, well, Father Nick, I don't really know what I'm battling, what I need to be fasting from. Well, I wrote some questions down. And hopefully this may give you a great filtering system. Do you arrange your schedule around this thing? Whatever that is, do you arrange your schedule around it? Are you keeping it a secret? In other words, are you not wanting to share it with someone? Is it isolating you from other people? Do the people around you say that you have a problem with it? And worse yet, if you were to stop this thing that you need to fast from, could you be able to stop it over the next 6 days? Is it is it something that I cannot stop then for 40 days? Because the reality is, friends, is that the Bible is very clear with us. It tells us that we need to be careful not to let sin reign in our mortal bodies so that you obey its evil desires. This is found in the book of Romans, chapter 6. It says, do not offer the parts of your body to sin as instruments of wickedness, but rather offer yourselves to God, for sin shall not be your master. So think of it like this, like in one corner of this battle, if you will, the spiritual battle that you're in, on one corner of the ring is our flesh man. And on the other side of the ring is our spirit man. And every day when you wake up in the morning, there's like this little ding ding. Now you may not hear that ding ding, but you hear this beginning of this battle. And the question that you have to ask yourselves is, who is going to win that battle? Because every one of us are following something. And what fasting does, not only does it do what Dr. Greger was talking about, this purifying of all the toxins that we can have within our body, our physical body, so that we can go and do the great things that God has in store for us. But it also says, I'm going to allow my spirit man to win the battle against my flesh man. I'm not going to allow my body to lead me. I'm going to let my soul lead me.
Well, and I think that's true with so many things that I think get in the way. I mean, the ultimate question at the, conclusion of all those great questions that sort of help us reflect is, does it allow me to serve God? By following this thing, by being contained with this thing, normally, what we struggle so much with at the end of the day is preventing us from living a life that serves Christ. And we cannot honor God if we are putting somebody else in the throne that only he's supposed to be in. And I think there's so many things in our life that we do that with. Many, many things that we have put on that throne. And so in the fasting season, as we are sort of purifying what we are ingesting and what we are putting in to sort of help our bodies and souls to sort of thrive and draw in spiritual closeness with Christ, we're also then that second step is being so reflective as to what we're putting on the throne and what we are allowing to guide us, to control us, to shape our decisions, and what we're prioritizing. So food is a first step in that step of reflecting and discerning where we're really going. So the fasting season is really this beautiful synergy between what we are putting in and what is then coming out in terms of the result.
I love that. Right. And I think that's the beauty of Orthodoxy, Roxanne, is that we're part of a faith tradition that has fasting as really part of the very fabric of our faith. So that the church literally inserts these days, these opportunities, if you will, to do just what you're talking about, this depriving of what's going in or filtering or discerning what's coming in our body to make sure that what we're giving out is actually what God yearns for us to do, is that we're actually taking what we've, this depriving of our flesh desire so that we can allow ourselves to let our soul lead the way.
Well, and, I want to speak a moment here for, so many people during the fasting season who do struggle, with eating disorders. And I think this is an important topic that during this time, for people with eating disorders, I often get this question of, how do I fast if I've had an eating disorder? Well, in many ways, when we start to restrict food, that becomes the God itself. That becomes the thing that we're serving. And it really does undermine the purpose of what I'm trying to serve. And I often talk to my patients about, during fasting, we don't want you to think too much about food. We want you to think about how to serve Christ, and that becomes the thing that you remove food from the throne and you put Christ back on that throne. And so similarly, for anyone, you're really thinking about the fasting season in terms of how it's going to ultimately help me to better connect my life with his life, my purpose with his purpose, my will with his will. And so I think it's important that we really look at, the tool and how we're using that tool. Because for a lot of people, fasting can become almost Pharisaic. I see that a lot too, where we're worshiping the rule itself, as opposed to the fruit of that rule and that tool in our life.
Absolutely. And so, every week, friends, we love to give you very practical steps. So I want to give you 3 areas that I'd like for you to practice during this Advent season, reminding yourself of what St. Basil says, one of the great church fathers. He says that we should be fasting from our sin. And so let me give you just those 3 areas that I'd love for you to kind of work on during this Advent season. Here's the first one is whatever that area is of your life, get away from it. Now, you may be asking, well, what's it? Well, it's your it. It's whatever you believe, whatever area of your life does what that earlier list of questions that I shared with you, whatever that area that's keeping you, that's holding you back from really connecting to Christ in a much deeper level. So for many people, they kind of buy into this lie that, well, Father Nick, I've got it under control. Or sometimes they just kind of manage it on their own. Friends, remember me telling you this. We don't manage sin, we run from it. It's important to remember that. The Bible puts it this way: run from immorality. And from all other sins a man commits are outside his body. But he who sins sexually sins against his own body. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You are bought at a price. And there's this amazing statement now. Therefore, honor God with your body. So I would encourage you, friends, is to make sure that you're running from it. Whatever that it is for you, run from it. Here's the second one. I would say guard your mind. And Roxanne, we spend so much time talking about this, but how powerful our thoughts are. And one of these important principles that I would encourage you, just like I shared earlier, that we don't manage sin, we run from it. In this particular principle, I would tell you that our beliefs shape our behaviors. Said simply, you will live what you believe. So that can have a positive note. Obviously, when we're believing in Christ and following his teachings and following his commandments and the teachings of our church fathers, then we live that way. But the opposite is true. When we have a negative thought that we fixate on, whatever it may be, impatience, unforgiveness, you can insert whatever vice that may be for you. You have to recognize that your mind becomes the pathway of your life and the way you live. In fact, we oftentimes say, show me your life, show me your thoughts, and I'll show you your life. And so I would encourage all of you that as you're listening, one of the things that we oftentimes tell ourselves is be careful of what your mind is thinking. I love in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23, an extraordinary, beautiful verse. This is all part of the Sermon on the Mount, many of you have heard about. This is what Jesus says. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So the eye, your mind, if you will, if you are losing the battle, it's most likely happening at the beginning point and not at the decision point.
So if we're not really gratifying the flesh all day long, with the fasting helps us tune into all of these things. Okay. So what you just said, it helps us tune into what is leading us, what we are prioritizing. It helps us tune into, what we're looking at, what we're thinking about, what's going on in our mind. I think the problem is when we're gratifying the flesh all day long, we are not really tuning in to our spirit. Right. We're highly connected in that flesh man, not so connected with our spirit man. And so that really is, the sole purpose of fasting is to get us more acquainted with our spirit in connection to Christ.
And the final thing, Roxanne, as we're closing out our show and really just had such an extraordinary interview with Dr. Michael Greger, I think the third things that we would challenge you with, friends, is go all in with God. Or said simply, go deeper in your relationship with Christ during this Advent season. I think it's one of those things that so often we have to remember that fasting was always intended to be a tool, not so much a rule. It's a tool for you to get closer to Christ, to get into a better and a deeper relationship with him. And for some of us, we've kind of been in what I like to call the shallow end of Christianity, or maybe an elementary Christianity. But I want you to graduate. The Bible says, St. Paul says that when we were young, we thought like we were young. But now that we're older, we need to think like we're older. What he was basically saying is that some of us, we need to grow up in our walk of faith. And so I want to encourage you during this Lenten season to go deeper in your faith. How so, Father Nick? I would say for you, every day to be intentional with your time of prayer. Be intentional with every day making time to just simply connect with Christ without any distractions, without any other areas. Just have a moment or 5 to 10 to 15 minutes of just simple time in prayer. That you would also be very disciplined now with your opportunities to read a portion of the Bible. And it may be through a Bible app, or it may be through the Orthodox Church's different Bible readings for the day, but be intentional about reading them. And at the end of every time you read the scriptures, I want you to ask yourself this question: God, what are you trying to tell me today? Because again, as Roxanne beautifully said earlier, we don't want to put just the Bible for reading purposes to be on there without really taking it, making it part of our heart. In other words, we want to be able to take it from our minds to operating it in our lives and to make it part of who we are. And finally, in this holiday season, as we're approaching, I would encourage you to look for opportunities to make a difference. Every week, non negotiable, you should find areas, whether it be in your church, whether it be in your community, to make a difference in someone's life. I'm just simply going to make prayer, reading the Bible, making a difference, fasting, part of me going deeper in my faith. I'm going to leave the elementary level and go deeper into my walk of faith with Christ. And so we hope and pray that these really have encouraged you and kind of guided you in your walk of faith. And we also want to encourage you also as well is that, identify those things that you do want to be fasting from as far as food is concerned. I think that, it's one of those things that the church prescribes meat and dairy products, but, if you're not a big meat eater, that may not be an area that you need to necessarily do as far as food is concerned. But maybe, Roxanne, you can kind of share some thoughts about, other areas that they could be fasting from, besides the areas that we talked about that are spiritual.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, a lot of people, who sort of live a vegan lifestyle say, well, gosh, fasting's easy for me. But, if you really look at what Dr. Greger is proponent of, is a whole food plant-based diet. It's basically a vegan diet minus all of the junk, right?
Mm,
Minus all of the junk foods, the toxins that we are taking in,
mhm,
and really eating food clean as it comes from the earth is very different than eating non-meat and dairy products that have been converted into tasty treats for us, even as vegans. And so I think when you're really looking at fasting, the spiritual discipline comes along with the food not being so tantalizing, right?
mhm,
Not so gratifying of the flesh, because you can eat a vegan lifestyle and still have quite tantalizing food, right? And so I think that's not quite hitting the mark. And so we really look at the benefits of eating that way for ourselves physically, in
mhm,
that it gives us incredible energy, mental clarity, cleans up disease processes that are beginning within us, decreases inflammatory responses, increases our neurochemistry that helps us have the kind of mood we need to go out and make a difference in this world. So there are incredible benefits, but we really do have to be doing sort of more the whole food plant-based diet minus all the junk food, right? So that would be what
mhm.
I would encourage people during a fasting season: is don't just fast from the meat and dairy, but also, all the junk that comes along with convenience foods in today's society that I do think gratify the flesh.
Absolutely. And it's just being very intentional about ways that we can ultimately remember that our bodies are not our own, as the Bible says. They belong to God. And so we have to remember that we house the temple of the Holy Spirit, and how we uh, utilize our bodies should always be for the glory of God. And so we want to thank once again Dr. Michael Greger for taking the time to be with us. What an honor to have him on our show. Really just feel so blessed and honored to have had him on our show. But I also want to thank Matushka Trudy for producing our show. She does an amazing job every single Tuesday night here. And all the great people at Ancient Faith. We thank them in the spirit of Thanksgiving for allowing us to have a platform here on Ancient Faith Radio. They've done just an amazing job. And listen, friends, if you've enjoyed tonight's show, we do encourage you to share it with all your friends and family. You can find all of our shows. They're found on our website at thelohs.com. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you want to receive our daily inspirational messages, you can do so by going to our website at thelohs.com. That's LOUHS.com. Click on that subscribe button and put your email address in. And every single day, you'll receive a little word of encouragement. Friends, join us next Tuesday for a brand new Live with the Louhs show. May God bless you. Happy Thanksgiving, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist.